The messages carved into stone are considered to be the world's first written accounts.
Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of written record that we have. They've been translated.
5,000 years ago, someone pressed a reed into a Sumerian tablet, leaving a warning not for a king, not for their neighbors, but for the future. Buried for millennia, it lay silent and forgotten. Until now. Today, artificial intelligence is decoding these ancient tablets faster than any human could, revealing floods that destroyed empires, gods who abandoned cities, and civilizations that believed they were untouchable. So here's the question. Was this Sumerian tablet recording the past, or warning us about the future? The clay prophecy. Before we get to the warnings, you need to understand what these tablets actually are, because the story of their discovery is almost as dramatic as what's written on them. Around 3,300 BC, in a city called Uruk, in what is now southern Iraq, something happened that had never happened before in the history of our species. Someone invented writing. Not an alphabet, and not letters, something stranger. A system of wedge-shaped marks pressed into soft clay with a cut reed that could record a thought and preserve it beyond the lifespan of the person who thought it. The marks looked like bird tracks, like tiny arrows frozen in mud. Scholars would later call them cuneiform.
The writing system which Cyrus's officials used was the traditional cuneiform script, which had been invented in ancient Iraq well before 3000 BC.
From the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge. The city of Uruk at that time was unlike anything the world had seen. It covered roughly 250 hectares and has been called the first city in world history by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Thousands of people lived there, priests, merchants, laborers, farmers. The temples dominated the skyline. The economy was booming, and the administrators of that economy needed a way to keep track of grain, livestock, wages, and debts. So they invented the most powerful technology in human history, the ability to store language outside the human brain. At first, it was simple: pictograms, little drawings of sheep, jars of oil, bundles of grain. But over the next few centuries, something remarkable happened. The system evolved. The pictures became abstract, the marks became phonetic. They could represent sounds, not just objects. And suddenly, you could write down not just how many goats a farmer owned, but what a god said to a king in a dream. You could record a prayer, a poem, a curse. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, a cuneiform was being used for everything: legal contracts, royal decrees, medical texts, astronomical observations, love letters, and lullabies. The Sumerians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and dozens of other cultures across the ancient Near East.
Sumerians, Babylonians, all those people, they wrote on clay. That was their natural activity. And clay tablets, which have impressions of writing on, are pretty good, they're pretty stable.
Adopted this script. It would remain in use for over 3,000 years, longer than the Latin alphabet has existed. The tablets themselves were brilliantly practical. Clay was everywhere in Mesopotamia. You could shape a tablet in minutes. I write on it while it was wet, and then let the sun harden it. If you made a mistake, you soaked the tablet in water and started over. But if the message was important, a legal agreement, a temple record, a royal inscription, you baked the tablet in a kiln. And once baked, that tablet could survive almost anything. Fire, flood, war, time, that's exactly what happened. While papyrus crumbled and parchment rotted and empires dissolved into sand, the clay survived. And hundreds of thousands of tablets were buried under the ruins of ancient cities, sealed in collapsed temples and libraries. They waited there for millennia, silent, patient, unread. And then, in the 19th century, archaeologists started digging them up. The first major discovery came from Nineveh, in present-day northern Iraq. There, buried beneath the rubble of a destroyed Assyrian palace, the excavators found the library of King Ashurbanipal.
In 1842, British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard unearthed the ruins of the Great Library of Ashurbanipal.
A 7th century BC ruler who had attempted to collect every written work in the known world. Over 30,000 tablets and fragments were shipped back to the British Museum. Most of them sat in storage for decades because almost no one alive could read cuneiform. Enter George Smith. Smith was not a professor, he wasn't even formally educated. He was a banknote engraver from a working-class London family who spent his lunch breaks at the British Museum teaching himself to read cuneiform from the tablets other scholars had set aside. His talent was so obvious that Henry Rawlinson, one of the men who had first cracked the cuneiform code, hired him to help catalogue the collection. One day in November 1872, Smith was sorting through fragments from Ashurbanipal's library when he came across a tablet labelled K63. As he cleaned the lime deposits from its surface and began to read, he found something that made him leap from his chair. According to his colleagues, he began to strip off his clothes and run around the room in a state of euphoric disbelief. What had he found? A story about a great flood, a man warned by a god to build a boat, animals loaded on board, a dove sent out to find land. It was the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known work of literature in human history.
Gilgamesh is a semi-mythical king of Uruk, an ancient city of Mesopotamia, and is best known as the star of the first epic poem ever written, the Epic of Gilgamesh.
And its flood narrative predated the biblical story of Noah by at least 1,000 years. On December 3, 1872, Smith presented his discovery to the Society of Biblical Archaeology. The British Prime Minister, William Gladstone, was in the audience. The story made front-page news around the world, and from that day forward, the ancient clay tablets of Mesopotamia were no longer curiosities. They were keys to understanding the origins of civilization itself. But the flood story was just the beginning, because buried in those same archives, scattered across museums from Philadelphia to Istanbul to the Louvre, were other tablets, older, stranger, more disturbing, that contained warnings the ancient world desperately wanted to preserve. Ziusudra's secret. Long before the Epic of Gilgamesh was carved into Ashurbanipal's library tablets, the Sumerians had their own version of the flood. It's called the Eridu Genesis, and it is the oldest flood narrative ever found. The tablet that preserves it dates to roughly 1600 BC, but the story it tells is believed to be far older, part of an oral tradition stretching back thousands of years before it was ever committed to clay. The tablet itself is fragmentary. About 2/3 of the original text is lost. What remains was published in 1914 by the Assyriologist Arno Pobel, working from a tablet in the University of Pennsylvania Museum, catalogue number C, BS 10673. And even in its broken state, the story it tells is extraordinary. It begins with creation. The Sumerian gods, An, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag, create the black-headed people, the Sumerians' term for themselves, and the animals of the earth. They established the first cities: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, and Shurupak. Each city is assigned a patron deity. Civilization flourishes, but then something goes wrong. The humans become too numerous, too noisy. In the Sumerian worldview, this wasn't a metaphor. The gods had a physical relationship with the world, and the racket of humanity was keeping Enlil, the supreme god of wind and earth, from sleeping. His solution was absolute: destroy them all. Wipe the species from the face of the earth with a catastrophic flood. The gods swore an oath. None of them would interfere, none of them would warn the humans. But one god broke rank. His name was Enki, the god of wisdom, of freshwater, of cunning. Enki couldn't violate his oath directly, so he did something brilliantly devious. He stood on one side of a reed wall and spoke, not to a man, but to the wall itself. On the other side of that wall stood Ziusudra, the king of Shurupak and a priest, and Ziusudra happened to overhear every word. The tablet preserves what Enki said, and the line is chilling in its directness. A decision that the seed of mankind is to be destroyed has been made. Ziusudra built a boat. He loaded it with his family and animals. The storm came, 7 days and 7 nights of wind and rain, so violent that the tablet describes it as evil winds that tossed the huge boat about on the great waters. When the storm finally broke, the sun god Utu appeared and Ziusudra opened a window and fell to his knees. The flood receded. Ziusudra sacrificed an ox and a sheep, and the gods, stunned to find a survivor, and eventually granted him something no other human had ever received: eternal life. He was sent to live in Dilmun, a paradisial land where the sun rises forever. Now here's what makes this story more than mythology. Archaeological excavations at Shuruppak, the city where Ziusudra was said to be king, have revealed a distinct layer of riverine sediment, radiocarbon dated to approximately 2900 BC. Similar flood layers have been found at Uruk, Kish, and other southern Mesopotamian sites. There was a real flood, a devastating, civilization-disrupting event that buried cities under meters of silt and interrupted settlement for generations. The Eridu Genesis didn't just imagine a catastrophe, it remembered one. And the warning it preserved wasn't simply about water, it was about what happens when the powerful decide the lives below them are expendable. And about the one voice willing to risk everything to say, "Pay attention, something is coming, build the boat." That warning would echo through every version of the flood story that followed, through Atrahasis, through Gilgamesh, through Genesis. And it all started here, on a broken clay tablet in a museum basement in Philadelphia. The forgotten catastrophe. Not every warning on these tablets is about a future catastrophe. Some are about catastrophes that have already happened, told with such raw grief that they feel as immediate today as they did 4,000 years ago. The Lament for Ur is one of the most devastating poems in human history. Composed around 2000 BC, shortly after the fall of the third dynasty of Ur, it tells the story of a great city's destruction, not through myth, but through the voice of a goddess who watched it happen and could not stop it. Ur was one of the crown jewels of Sumerian civilization. At its height under the Third Dynasty, it was the center of an empire that controlled most of southern Mesopotamia. Its ziggurat still stands in modern-day Iraq, one of the best preserved ancient structures in the world.
The Sumerian city of Uruk. At the heart of each Sumerian city would be a temple complex that was marked by the Great Ziggurat, which was a multi-leveled, monumental structure.
The city had temples, administrative centers, schools, artisan workshops, and a harbor full of trading vessels. It was prosperous, powerful, and, its people believed, protected by the gods. In 2004 BC, during the final year of King Ibisin's reign, the Elamites invaded from the east. The city fell. The destruction was total. The lament is composed of 11 songs, stanzas of varying length, and its central voice belongs to Ningal, the goddess of the moon and the patron deity of Ur. She is not an abstract figure in this poem. She is a mother watching her children die. Before the destruction, Ningal sensed what was coming. She went to the supreme gods, An and Enlil, and she begged. The tablet preserves her words, "Let not my city be destroyed, let not Ur be destroyed, let not its people perish." But An would not change the decree, and Enlil would not comfort her heart. The decision had been made. What follows is one of the oldest descriptions of urban warfare ever written. The poem describes spears and axes sharpened before the city gates, barbed arrows falling like rain clouds, large stones crashing with great thuds, 3 days and 3 nights of relentless siege. And then the breach, the social order collapses. Or the tablet records it with terrible precision. The mother looked away from her daughter. The people groaned. The father turned away from his son. The people groaned. In the city, the wife was abandoned. The child was abandoned. Possessions were scattered about. Daughters and sons were carried off in ships. Treasures were looted. Fires were kindled in every storehouse. The people of Shemashki and Elam, the destroyers, counted the great temple's worth at only 30 shekels. And Ningal? The goddess departed her own city, the poem says, like a bird in fright. She lived in exile, unable to find rest, and cried out, "My city has become a strange city. How do I exist? My house has turned to tears." The parallels to later literature are unmistakable. The biblical Book of Lamentations, written after the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BC, mirrors the lament for Ur in both structure and emotion. The personification of a mourning city, Or the divine abandonment, the cataloguing of suffering. Scholars have drawn direct links between the two traditions. The grief is universal, the pattern is ancient. But the lament for isn't just an elegy. It's a warning encoded as memory. It says this is what happens when an empire overextends, when the divine order fails, when the contract between power and the people breaks. The city that believed itself permanent was reduced to rubble in 3 days, and the goddess who was supposed to protect it could do nothing but weep. Naram-Sin's reckoning. If the lament for is a poem of grief, the curse of Agada is a poem of reckoning, and its target is one of the most powerful men who ever lived. Naram-Sin ruled the Akkadian Empire from approximately 2254 to 2218 BC. He was the grandson of Sargon the Great, founder of the world's first true empire. Under Naram-Sin, the Akkadian Empire reached its zenith, stretching from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, from the mountains of Anatolia to the lowlands of Elam. He defeated coalitions of rebel kings. He expanded trade routes. He brought home treasures from every corner of the known world. And then he did something no Mesopotamian king had done before. He declared himself a living god. In the ancient Near East, kings were intermediaries between the divine and the human. They served the gods. They built the gods' temples. They maintained the cosmic order by staying in their lane. Naram-Sin stepped out of that lane. He placed the divine determinative, the cuneiform marker for a god, before his own name. He wore the horned helmet of divinity in his official imagery. His famous victory stele, carved in pink limestone and now in the Louvre, shows him towering over fallen enemies, ascending a mountain toward the stars. The curse of Agad was written generations after his reign, and during the III period, and scholars classify it as Naru literature. Historical fiction designed to teach a moral lesson, but the lesson it teaches is devastating. According to the poem, the god Enlil withdrew his favor from the city of Akkad without explanation. Trade ceased, the canals dried up, prosperity vanished overnight. Naram-Sin, confused and desperate, prayed for signs and omens. None came. For 7 years, the king waited in mourning, tearing the canopy from his ceremonial barge, uncovering his chariot with reed mats, giving away his royal regalia. But patience was not Naram-Sin's strength. When the gods refused to answer, his grief turned to rage. He marched his army to Nippur, the holiest city in Sumer, and attacked the Ekur, the temple of Enlil himself. The poem describes his soldiers breaking open the bedchamber that had never known daylight. They melted down the temple's gold, loaded its silver into leather bags, filled the docks with its copper. As sacred guardian statues were thrown into fire, the poem delivers its verdict in a single devastating image. With the possessions being taken away from the city, good sense left Agade. Enlil's response was total. He unleashed the Gutians, mountain tribes described as barely human, people who knew no grain and knew no house. They swept down from the highlands and consumed everything. Irrigation collapsed, fields went barren. The army couldn't fight because the land couldn't feed it. Famine spread, bodies lay in the streets. A city that had once overflowed with gold became a place where, the poem says, even small fish could not be found in the canals. The historical reality behind the curse is more nuanced. The Akkadian Empire likely fell due to a combination of environmental change, drought, and internal fragmentation, not a single act of impiety. Naram-Sin himself appears to have been quite pious. He rebuilt the temple of Enlil at Nippur, but the later writers who composed the curse chose him precisely because his self-deification made him the perfect cautionary figure. The message is clear: power without humility is a lit fuse. The king who elevates himself above the sacred order doesn't just destroy himself, he destroys everyone who depends on him. The canals dry up, the grain withers, the children go hungry, and the gods, when they withdraw, do not come back on request. It's a warning that was copied and recopied for over 1,000 years. School scribes in Babylonia studied it as part of their curriculum. Ashurbanipal preserved copies in his great library at Nineveh. The story was too important to lose. because the Mesopotamians knew that the temptation to become Naram-Sin never goes away.
Mesopotamia is an exceedingly fertile plain situated between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers.
Translating time for most of the last century, translating cuneiform has been painstakingly slow work. There are only a few hundred qualified Assyriologists in the world. The British Museum alone holds approximately 100,000 unpublished cuneiform tablets. Museums across the globe, in Philadelphia, Istanbul, Baghdad, Berlin, Paris, Vienna, Oxford, house hundreds of thousands more. The vast majority have never been translated. Many have barely been catalogued. The math is simple and depressing. At the rate human scholars work, it would take centuries to read everything the ancient world left behind. And then artificial intelligence entered the picture. In 2023, a team led by Shay Gordon at Ariel University in Israel, in collaboration with researchers from Tel Aviv University, published a breakthrough in the journal.
This is Ariel University, located in the hills of biblical Samaria. Established in 1982,
PNAS Nexus. They had trained a neural machine translation model, the same core technology that powers Google Translate, on a corpus of Akkadian cuneiform texts from the open, richly annotated cuneiform corpus. The model learned to translate Akkadian into English in two ways: from transliterations of the original text, and directly from Unicode representations of the cuneiform symbols themselves. The results weren't perfect. The model scored 37.47 on the BLU4 metric, a standard measure of machine translation quality, which means its output is useful but still requires human review, especially for literary and poetic texts. But for administrative documents, legal contracts, and formulaic inscriptions, it was remarkably effective. Luis Sáenz, one of the researchers, emphasized that the AI wasn't meant to replace human scholarship. It was meant to accelerate it, to clear the backlog, to let a scholar working on a specific literary text avoid spending months on routine administrative tablets. Meanwhile, an independent researcher named Frank Kruger built something even more ambitious. The AICC, the AI Cuneiform Corpus, a collection of 130,000 cuneiform texts translated from Sumerian and Akkadian to English using a custom-trained large language model. It is the largest collection of translated cuneiform texts in the world. Only about 4% of known Sumerian texts had publicly available translations before his project. The AICC has multiplied that number many times over, and in 2024, UC Berkeley's CUNE Translate project began exploring transformer architectures for cuneiform translation, while another team developed ProtoSnap, a generative AI system that standardizes the wildly variable handwriting of ancient scribes, and making it far easier for machine learning models to recognize and transcribe individual cuneiform signs. Think about what this means. For 5,000 years, these tablets have been silent. For 2 centuries, a handful of scholars have read them one by one with magnifying glasses and reference dictionaries and lifetimes of training. Now, a machine can process thousands in a day. And what it's finding is not just grain receipts and livestock inventories. It's finding poetry, prayers, medical incantations, astronomical calculations so sophisticated that scholars had assumed those techniques weren't developed until 14th century Europe. It's finding letters between lovers and complaints from students and curses laid on enemies and lullabies sung to children who have been dust for 4 millennia. It's finding warnings, the same warnings, repeated across centuries and cultures, pressed into clay by people who knew their world was fragile. Here's what stays with me. 5,000 years ago, a scribe sat in the shade of a temple wall in southern Iraq, holding a reed stylus and a slab of wet clay. They knew the flood stories, they knew the laments, they knew what happened to what happened to Agade, what happened when the powerful stopped listening and the gods turned their faces away. And they wrote it down, not because it was their job, but because they believed someone, someday, would need to hear it. We are that someone. All the warnings on these tablets are not about gods and kings. They're about us. About what happens when we confuse power with permanence, when we stop maintaining the systems that keep us alive, when we dismiss the quiet voices that say, Something is wrong, and it's getting closer. The clay remembered. The question is whether we will. If this changed the way you think about the ancient world, subscribe. There are more stories buried in these tablets, and some of them haven't been read by anyone in 5,000 years. Until now.